South Africa could suffer significant economic loss if foreign nationals are kicked out of the country. That's according to a report by the South African Institute of Race Relations released today. It comes in the wake of the recent flare-up of violence against foreign nationals in some areas of Gauteng. Now, for more on this, we're now joined in studio by Rian Malan from the South African Institute of Race Relations. Rian, thank you so much for joining us this evening.
Thank you for having me.
Rian, take us through the significance of this study, especially in light of the recent events that we've seen.
Well, you know, South Africa is a great anomaly in the field of migration. Humans have been migrating since God invented us. A lot of the migration takes place to rich countries. In the case of South Africa, people are migrating towards a country with overwhelming problems, with massive unemployment rate, and a country that can't even begin to create jobs for itself. But foreigners arrive, often from the rest of Africa or Asia in South Africa, and they manage to find work where there is theoretically none. Their unemployment rate is approximately half to a third of that of South Africans as such. And in some instances, they do very well indeed and add hugely to the sum of economic light in South Africa. We're trying to figure out the mechanisms which made this possible. And secondly, part of the report is what we will lose if our xenophobes win the day and all the foreigners are expelled, as some people would like to see in South Africa.
Rian, let's look at the argument around xenophobia. I mean, we even saw it at the APRM event last week. There was a huge debate around it where recently you've seen, foreigners being accused of crimes, but secondly, some saying that, they're taking jobs and economic opportunities for locals. I mean, where does this notion come from?
Well, this is an unpopular thing to say, and I'll be accused of xenophobia myself. I have a great deal of sympathy with young black South Africans who are 23 years old and have never had a job but might never find one. It must be an incredibly bitter thing to sit inside their souls and see foreigners coming into the country. So do foreigners take our jobs? The answer is to a certain extent, yes, and only in certain sectors. People who come here to work wind up working in agriculture or security. I interviewed a guy in this report, a Malawian citizen who was working 26 12-hour shifts a month for 2,000 Rand a month. That's 6 Rand an hour. So that's true, but on the other hand, there's another class of migrants, is that those who come here to work for themselves, who wind up creating jobs where there was none, and creating businesses where none existed previously. I could give you some examples if you'd like to hear me, and I think that especially if you take, say, for example, the spaza shop trade in South Africa, the grocery business in South Africa.
Which is massive.
It is, yes. And 15 years ago, it was entirely an African-run thing. Then after, around about 15 years ago, the massive white monopoly capital, the forces of white monopoly capital, the great retailers started moving into the townships. We wind up with a situation where everyone in the townships is living fairly close to a major retailer, and that really damaged the indigenous spaza trade. So you found somewhere along the lines, like these closed or defunct or failing spazas, as foreigners started moving into them, renting the spazas from their South African owners, and they somehow, against all odds, and with it's a great triumph for the human spirit, is by exercise of old-fashioned virtues like hard work and thrift, is they not only make a success of themselves and seem to sort of make a fairly good living, but they also provide excellent services to black South Africans, to people in townships. Something I didn't believe until I saw it with my own eyes, that it's possible to buy a can of baked beans for less in Soweto than I pay at a Checkers outlet in the leafy suburbs of White Johannesburg. So I think that South Africans, we certainly need to have a conversation about this, but there's a great deal that we stand to lose if the foreigners are expelled. One of them would be that low prices, convenience. I had my hair cut this morning in order to look semi-decent. I paid 40 Rand to a Pakistani barbershop. It would have cost me 3 times that at least if I'd gone to a smart place in a suburban shopping mall. So I think all of us in ways benefit from, in ways that some of us are reluctant to acknowledge from the presence of foreigners here. It's not all exploitation and stealing jobs. I think they do add to the sum of light here.
Speaking of adding, value in the country, I want us to delve further into their business models. We've seen it in the townships where foreign nationals come in and, they rent these plaza shops in the townships and, they start their shops there. But then they've got this model where they assist each other. So, they come in as a group and they really go and buy from the big wholesalers together. And the business model seems to be working for them. Why aren't we learning from them, instead of being deterred by what seems to be working for them?
Well, I think we could. This is the point you just made is a very good one. Is they build partnerships which exist on handshakes and love, okay, with people that you know and trust, often from your hometown in the country, sometimes from your same tribe, nationality, or in the clan. In the case of Somalis, the same clan, and it's all done on an honesty basis. People work together. They cooperate, and it gives them enormous strength, as our own national motto says.
It's a conglomerate of sorts,
And I do think South Africans could fairly easily emulate those things. Our Minister of Small Businesses got herself in trouble a few years ago by saying that foreigners should share their business secrets. And I'm afraid, a lot of people have conspiracy theories that they're somehow cheating or doing something, but I'm afraid that, our research shows that basically what they're doing, it's the triumph of old Victorian virtues like hard work, shift, parsimoniously. These guys work 7 days a week. They start at the absolute bottom. They arrive in South Africa with a few dollars tucked into their underpants, and they typically start working for nothing because they've got to pay off the people who smuggled them. And then they start working for pocket money, for 800 Rand a month, a wage that almost no South African would be ever prepared to touch.
So are we not hardworking enough, or are we not willing to do certain jobs? Is there a sense of entitlement there? What is it that we're doing wrong?
I don't think so. I think the other great advantage the foreigners have is that they exist outside of the law in South Africa. They often don't have work permits. They might have refugee. They can't get bank accounts. They can't really access as part of the system. And so what is they do? They exist in this universe where there's very little regulation. The concept of minimum wages and trade unions and so they're out of that. And yes, there's a lot of exploitation in that world. But this is often foreigners exploiting the others, and often members of their own family. One person will come and establish a beachhead, start selling, in the case of Mozambicans, tomatoes on the streets and do rather well, whistle up relatives, and then I find a lot of, to a certain extent, that I know that their presence here and upsets a lot of people in South Africa, but you have to acknowledge the triumph of the human spirit and hard work. I think they set a good example for all of us.
Now, something that I want us to look at, because we're running out of time, is just in terms of your study in itself. It takes us through the impact that foreign nationals play on our local economy. Now, what needs to happen to stem what we've seen recently? There have been discussions about, let's have social cohesion dialogues, but those have been happening so often. You even mentioned the small business minister, who encouraged locals to learn from foreign nationals in terms of business. So what needs to happen, going forward to make sure that, we can live together and work together?
To some extent, charity begins at home. We have laws, a very comprehensive set of laws that are supposed to control and govern immigration. I feel that they should be enforced in a way that's fair to everyone concerned. I think we're morally obliged to accept refugees and so forth. There is some abuse of the system. In fairness to the people who can't find work in South Africa, they should be given a chance. Beyond that, I think we need to have a conversation nationally about. I was in a small town in the Karoo last week where, if you'd been there 100 years ago, 50 years ago, you would have found sort of poor whites working the land with hoes and tills, and in the burning sun, something the whites stopped doing a long time ago, and then everyone else in this town stopped doing it as well, irrespective of race. Into this scene steps a Malawian woman. She sees all this land lying fallow, and there's water available, so she hires herself a bit of it, gets some relatives in it, and they're out there in the burning sun working with little hoes, they're now doing things that South Africans of all races regard as absolutely impossible. They've now got many hectares they're turning the desert green, and they're adding to our economy. Everyone who works for the Malawian entrepreneur in question is buying beer at the local bottle store and buying baked beans at the local trading store, and they're buying petrol, and then they're shipping their stuff to markets in George and Cape Town, and if you could click your finger and make them all disappear, you would not have helped anyone in South Africa. We would only have damaged ourselves.
And that's where the conversation needs to go. It's such a multifaceted topic, but unfortunately we've run out of time. Thank you so much for joining us, Rian.
Thank you very much.
That was Rian Malan, a fellow at the Institute of Race Relations. We'll have more news for you.